Summer, 1944. Northern France. The hatch slams shut with a metallic crack that echoes through 60 tons of German steel. Inside the turret of a WWII tank, the air already smells like oil, sweat, hot metal, and burned cordite. The engine growls beneath the crew's boots while the commander presses his eyes against the periscope, scanning the hedgerows ahead. Nothing moves. No Allied tanks. No aircraft. No gunfire. Just silence. And that silence is exactly why he feels safe. Because this machine beneath him is supposed to be unstoppable. Its frontal armor is nearly 4 inches thick. Its 88mm cannon can kill an American Sherman from over a mile away. Entire villages have watched Tiger tanks roll through their streets like steel gods, crushing walls, fences, and confidence at the same time. The crew believes what German propaganda has told them for years. No enemy tank can stand against them. No infantryman can stop them. No army can survive them. And honestly? For a while, that belief seemed true. Poland collapsed. France collapsed. The Balkans collapsed. Even deep inside Russia, German panzer divisions ripped across entire continents like predators tearing through open flesh. The tank became more than a weapon. It became mythology. But here's the thing mythology always forgets. Every empire eventually mistakes fear for invincibility. And in 1944, somewhere in the French countryside, that mistake is about to kill thousands of German tank crews who still think armor alone can save them. The Tiger commander wipes sweat from his brow and keeps searching through the optics. Still nothing. Then the world explodes. Not one shell. Hundreds. The earth erupts in every direction simultaneously. Dirt, fire, steel fragments, and smoke burst upward so violently that the entire tank physically jumps off the ground. The commander's headset fills with screaming. The gunner loses his sight picture instantly as the optics shatter. The loader smashes face first into the breach. The concussion punches through the hull like an invisible hammer. Outside, trees snap apart. Tracks tear loose. Engines ignite. And before the crew can even figure out where the attack came from, the second wave arrives. Then the third. Then the fourth. The Tiger tank that once terrified entire Allied battalions is now blind, deaf, trapped, and dying inside a crater without ever firing a shot. No enemy soldier is visible. No American tank appears on the horizon. The Germans cannot even see who is killing them. And that was the point. Because the Americans were fighting an entirely different war. Most World War II documentaries spend endless hours debating tanks. Tiger versus Sherman. Panther versus Churchill. Armor thickness. Gun penetration. Who had the bigger cannon? Who had the better steel? But that debate misses the actual reality of how Germany lost the war in Western Europe. The Americans did not beat German armor by building a better tank. They beat it by turning artillery into a machine of industrial-scale precision. And the terrifying part? The Germans never fully understood what was happening to them. See, German military thinking still revolved around direct combat. Tank against tank. Gun against gun. Frontline against frontline. Even their greatest commanders believed battlefield dominance came from superior machines operated by superior crews. And to be fair, German tanks were formidable. A Panther could tear apart Shermans at long range. The Tiger's 88mm gun was feared everywhere. A King Tiger looked less like a vehicle and more like a moving fortress. But American military planners looked at the battlefield differently. They asked a simple question. Why risk fighting a Tiger tank head-on at all? Why send another tank against it? Why gamble American crews against thicker armor and larger guns? Why not just erase the entire grid square instead? That single idea changed modern warfare forever. Because while German engineers obsessed over steel thickness, the Americans obsessed over communication speed. And communication wins wars. Not glamour. Not propaganda. Not mythology. Communication. the Americans developed something called the Fire Direction Center, the FDC. And honestly, for the 1940s, it was revolutionary. Imagine a battlefield where every artillery battery is connected into one giant nervous system. A battlefield where information moves faster than tanks. A battlefield where a single observer can summon destruction from miles away within minutes. That's what the Americans built. German artillery was powerful, but rigid. Orders moved slowly. Coordination took time. Guns were often tied to specific sectors. If a target moved, the system struggled to adapt quickly. The American system worked differently. It was flexible, fluid, connected. Field telephones linked batteries together. FM radios allowed rapid communication between units. Forward observers relayed coordinates instantly. Inside the fire direction centers, teams of soldiers worked with plotting boards, maps, protractors, and firing tables like human computers. The moment a target was identified, calculations began immediately. Distance, elevation, wind, shell trajectory, timing. Within minutes, batteries spread across miles of countryside could all focus fire on one exact point. Now imagine being a German tank commander trying to survive against something like that. You're hidden beneath trees. Your engines are off. Your camouflage is perfect. You think nobody knows you're there. But 2 miles away, an American lieutenant lies motionless inside a muddy hedgerow with binoculars and a radio. He spots the glint of sunlight off your turret. That's all it takes. One transmission. One set of coordinates. And suddenly dozens of artillery batteries begin turning toward your position. The terrifying part is that you don't hear any of this happening. The guns are too far away. The crews loading shells into the howitzers cannot even see you. But mathematics can. The fire direction center processes the coordinates. Orders go out instantly. Guns adjust. Elevations change. Fuses are prepared. And somewhere across the countryside, American artillery crews wait calmly beside their weapons for a single command. Fire. The Tiger commander still sees nothing. Maybe he lights a cigarette. Maybe the crew jokes about American tanks. Maybe they believe they're safe because no enemy armor is nearby. Then the first shell lands. Except it usually wasn't just the first shell. That was another terrifying innovation. The Americans developed a tactic called time on target. TOT. And German survivors never forgot it. Normally, artillery gave warnings. You'd hear ranging shots. A few shells would land wide. Veteran soldiers learned to react quickly. Dive for cover. Start engines. Run for trenches. Every second mattered. The Americans decided the Germans should get no seconds at all. Using synchronized timing calculations, multiple artillery batteries fired at different moments so every shell arrived simultaneously. Heavy guns miles away fired first. Closer batteries fired seconds later. Mortars fired last. Different distances. Different shell speeds. Different firing times. One arrival. The result was horrifying. Instead of hearing isolated explosions gradually approach, German troops experienced instant annihilation. Hundreds of shells detonating together created a concussive shock wave so violent that survivors described it as the earth itself splitting apart. There was no warning. No preparation. No escape. 1 second the battlefield was silent. The next second entire armored formations disappeared inside walls of dirt and flame. American artillery officers later described time-on-target barrages with chilling simplicity. We wanted the enemy to die before he understood he was under attack. And often, that's exactly what happened. German crews inside Panthers and Tigers trusted their armor. But artillery didn't care about armor. That was the misunderstanding. A tank is designed to stop penetration. It is not designed to stop physics. A 155mm artillery shell weighed nearly 100 pounds. When dozens or hundreds detonated around armored vehicles simultaneously, the shock waves alone became catastrophic. Tracks ripped apart. Turrets jammed. Optics shattered. Fuel ignited. Radio systems failed. Even tanks that appeared untouched externally were often transformed into steel coffins internally. Because inside the armor, another nightmare began. Spalling. When enormous kinetic force slammed against a tank's exterior armor, fragments from the inner steel walls could shear loose at lethal velocity. Tiny pieces of metal became razor-edged projectiles ricocheting around the crew compartment. The shell didn't need to penetrate. The tank itself became the weapon killing the crew. American infantry advancing after artillery strikes repeatedly found German tanks sitting upright with almost no visible damage. Then they opened the hatch. And everyone inside was dead. Some had ruptured lungs. Others had catastrophic internal injuries. Some had simply been shredded by their own armor exploding inward. No dramatic fireball. No cinematic explosion. Just physics quietly turning invincible machines into tombs. And the worst part for the Germans? They still couldn't fight back effectively. Because the enemy killing them was mostly invisible. The artillery batteries sat miles away. The forward observers stayed hidden. The radios kept moving information faster than German commanders could react. The battlefield itself had changed. The Americans weren't trying to outgun the Tiger tank. They were bypassing the entire concept of tank superiority altogether. And German commanders slowly began realizing something terrifying. Their greatest weapon in the war was becoming irrelevant. Because no matter how thick your armor is, you cannot armor yourself against mathematics. The German Panzer crews eventually learned something terrifying about the Western Front. If the battlefield suddenly became quiet, they were probably already dead. Because American artillery had evolved beyond anything the German military expected to face. And by late 1944, the psychological pressure alone was starting to crush experienced Panzer veterans who had once rolled confidently across Europe. Imagine sitting inside a Panther tank in Normandy. The engine is off to avoid detection. Your crew hasn't spoken in several minutes. Outside, the countryside is unnervingly calm. Then somebody hears it. Not a bomber. Not a fighter plane. Not the roar of engines from a heavy aircraft. Just a faint buzzing sound overhead. Soft. Slow. Almost harmless. The commander looks up through the hatch and sees a tiny airplane drifting lazily across the sky. Fabric wings. Single propeller. No visible weapons. Barely faster than a car. It looks ridiculous. The Americans called it the L4 Grasshopper. Basically a military version of the Piper Cub. And German soldiers became absolutely terrified of it. Because that tiny airplane was often more dangerous than an entire squadron of bombers. The pilot usually carried no bombs. No machine guns. No armor plating. Just binoculars, a radio, and a map. But that radio connected him directly to the deadliest artillery system on Earth. The Grasshopper pilots floated low over forests, fields, and villages searching for movement below. Tank tracks. Engine smoke. Vehicle columns. Muzzle flashes. Anything. And once they found something, the killing started fast. German units learned this lesson repeatedly in France. An infantry squad would spot the little airplane overhead and panic. Some nervous machine gunner would open fire. The pilot instantly spotted the tracers coming up from the ground. He marked the location. Radioed the coordinates. And within minutes, American artillery shells started falling directly onto the German position. Over and over again, German commanders watched entire units disappear because one soldier couldn't resist shooting at the little observation plane overhead. Eventually the Germans issued standing orders across many sectors of the front. Do not fire at the grasshoppers unless absolutely necessary. Think about how insane that is. The Wehrmacht. The army that conquered most of Europe. The military force that once terrified the world. Reduced to hiding silently beneath trees because of a fabric-covered airplane flying 80 miles per hour. Veteran German crews described the psychological tension as unbearable. Every time they heard the weak little engine overhead, they froze. Engines off. Movement stopped. Cigarettes extinguished. Nobody spoke. Because they knew the moment they revealed themselves, American artillery could arrive within minutes. And that fear spread everywhere. Panzer commanders became reluctant to move during daylight. Supply trucks hesitated on open roads. Entire formations lost momentum because observation aircraft turned every visible movement into a potential artillery target. This is something most people completely misunderstand about World War II. Wars are not won only by destroying equipment. They're won by controlling behavior. And the Americans were slowly controlling German behavior across the battlefield. Not with fear of tanks. Fear of artillery. By late 1944, experienced German crews no longer asked, "Can we defeat the American tanks?" They asked, "Had they seen us yet?" Because once spotted, survival became uncertain no matter how strong your armor was. And the Americans kept improving the system. The fire direction centers became faster. Forward observers became more aggressive. Radio coordination became smoother. Entire artillery battalions could shift targets with astonishing speed. German officers who survived Normandy later described American artillery as almost mechanical in its efficiency. You fired one shot from a hidden position. Minutes later, artillery shells started arriving. You moved vehicles through an intersection. Shells arrived. You established a command post. Shells arrived. One German officer compared it to fighting an enemy that could see through forests. Another said American artillery responded like electricity. But even with all of this destruction, the deadliest American innovation was still coming. And when it arrived, it fundamentally changed the survival odds for every German soldier on the battlefield. It was called the VT proximity fuse. And the United States guarded it with extreme secrecy. The technology was considered so valuable that American commanders originally restricted its use over enemy territory. Not because it was ineffective. Because they were terrified the Germans might recover an unexploded shell and reverse engineer it. That's how important it was. To understand why the VT fuse was so devastating, you first need to understand how normal artillery shells worked. Traditional shells detonated after impact. They hit the ground. Then exploded. That sounds deadly enough, but there was a limitation. A huge amount of the explosion's energy disappeared into the dirt. Shrapnel spread outward, but trenches and foxholes still gave soldiers a chance to survive. If you got low enough, you might live. The VT fuse changed everything. Inside the shell was a miniature radio transmitter. And for the 1940s, that was astonishing technology. As the shell fell toward the ground, it continuously emitted radio waves downward. When those waves bounced back and indicated the shell was a certain distance above the surface, usually around 50 feet, the fuse detonated automatically in midair. Now think about what that means. Instead of the explosion wasting force into the ground, the shell burst directly above human beings. The shrapnel rained downward in every direction. Perfect killing geometry. Trenches no longer protected you. Foxholes no longer protected you. The explosion came from above. German soldiers later described VT airbursts as horrifying because there was often nowhere safe to hide. Even if you survived the initial fragments, the psychological effect was brutal. You could hear the shell approaching. Then suddenly the sky exploded over your head. And when the Americans finally unleashed VT shells during the Battle of the Bulge, the results were catastrophic. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Hitler launches one final massive offensive in the West. The Germans smash through American lines using surprise, fog, snow, and terrible weather. For several days, conditions actually favor the Germans. Aircraft struggle to operate. Visibility is awful. Roads become chaos. American units are caught off guard. And for a brief moment, it looks like the German army might actually split the Allied front apart. But then the weather clears. And American artillery begins firing VT proximity shells into the forests. What happened next became one of the most devastating artillery effects of the entire war. The shells detonated above the pine trees. The explosions shattered thick frozen branches and wooden trunks into high-speed splinters. Suddenly the forest itself became shrapnel. German infantry advancing beneath the trees were ripped apart not only by steel fragments but by exploding wood flying through the air like knives. Entire formations collapsed. Veteran soldiers who survived Soviet artillery, North Africa, and Normandy described the VT barrages in the Ardennes as some of the worst bombardments they had ever experienced. And once the infantry started dying, the panzers became vulnerable. Because tanks without infantry support are blind. American bazooka teams exploited that weakness immediately. German armor advancing through narrow roads and frozen fields suddenly found itself isolated. No infantry to protect the flanks. No infantry to scout forests. No infantry to clear buildings. Just tanks exposed to artillery, mines, ambushes, and anti-tank teams hiding in the snow. This is where the myth of German armored superiority truly began collapsing. Not because German tanks suddenly became weak, but because modern warfare had evolved beyond the idea that a single machine could dominate a battlefield through armor alone. The Americans understood something Germany never fully adapted to. Industrialized warfare is about systems. Not heroes. Not miracle weapons. Systems. Communication systems. Logistics systems. Fire coordination systems. Production systems. The Tiger tank was impressive. But it was still one machine. The American artillery network was an entire battlefield operating as one interconnected organism. And that organism kept getting smarter, faster, and more lethal. German commanders obsessed over building bigger tanks. Tiger. Panther. King Tiger. Jagdtiger. Heavier armor. Larger guns. More steel. But every additional ton created new problems. Fuel shortages. Mechanical failures. Bridge limitations. Transportation nightmares. Slow production. Meanwhile, the Americans focused on scalability, reliability, mobility, coordination. A Sherman tank didn't need to beat a Tiger in a duel if artillery could destroy the Tiger first. And honestly, this realization shattered German confidence more than people realize. Because once elite panzer crews understood they could die without ever seeing the enemy, battlefield psychology changed completely. Veteran commanders became cautious. Movement slowed. Aggression disappeared. And fear spread. Fear not of American tanks. Fear of invisible mathematics arriving through radios. By 1945, many German soldiers no longer believed victory was possible. Not because they lacked courage, but because they recognized the industrial reality crushing them. Every destroyed American artillery gun was replaced. Every lost radio was replaced. Every damaged Sherman was replaced. The American war machine kept growing larger while Germany grew weaker, slower, and more exhausted. And all across Europe, the artillery never stopped. Day. Night. Rain. Snow. Forest. Village. Crossroads. The shells kept coming. Because the real power of the American military wasn't just technology. It was the ability to combine technology, communication, logistics, and production into one coordinated system of destruction. And the Germans never truly found an answer for it. By early 1945, something strange was happening across the Western Front. German tank crews were still climbing into some of the most powerful armored vehicles ever built. The Tiger II. The King Tiger. Nearly 70 tons of steel. Massive sloped armor. A long-barreled 88mm cannon capable of destroying Allied tanks at absurd distances. On paper, it looked unstoppable. American tank crews feared it. British crews feared it. Even experienced Allied commanders respected it. But there was one massive problem. The battlefield had changed faster than German doctrine. Because by 1945, wars were no longer being decided by who built the strongest machine. They were being decided by who built the strongest network. And Germany was losing that war catastrophically. The King Tiger represented the final evolution of the German obsession with armored supremacy. Bigger gun. Thicker armor. More steel. More intimidation. It looked like the future. But in reality, it was already obsolete before the war even ended. Not obsolete because its gun was weak. Its gun was terrifying. Not because its armor was weak. Its armor was enormous. It was obsolete because it relied on an outdated idea of warfare. The idea that battlefield dominance came from individual weapons instead of integrated systems. The Americans understood something Germany never fully accepted. A battlefield is an information war. Who sees first? Who communicates fastest? Who coordinates quickest? Who responds immediately? That side wins. And once American artillery networks matured in Europe, German armored units increasingly found themselves fighting an enemy that operated faster than human reaction time. A panzer column might carefully camouflage itself beneath trees. Within minutes, a hidden observer spots movement. Coordinates get transmitted. The fire direction center processes data. Batteries adjust. And suddenly shells begin landing before the German commander even realizes he's been detected. That speed shattered morale. Because courage becomes difficult when death arrives invisibly. One German officer later described American artillery as a steel storm directed by mathematics. That's exactly what it was. And perhaps the most remarkable part of this entire story is how ordinary many of the American soldiers behind it actually were. The forward observer calling coordinates into a radio wasn't some legendary war hero from a propaganda poster. Often he was barely 20 years old. Cold. Exhausted. Wet. Terrified. Lying in mud with binoculars while German armor moved somewhere nearby. But in his hand sat something more powerful than a Tiger tank. Access. Access to an industrial-scale firepower network capable of deleting entire sectors of battlefield terrain. Think about the imbalance that created. A German crew might spend months training inside one incredibly expensive tank. Yet their survival could still depend entirely on whether one hidden American lieutenant saw them first. That reality slowly destroyed the mythology surrounding German armor. Because myths rely on visibility. People remember dramatic tank duels, exploding turrets, direct confrontations. But most German armored losses in Western Europe did not happen that way. Many vehicles were abandoned after artillery damage. Others became immobilized. Others lost crews to concussive bombardment. Others ran out of fuel while trying to escape constant artillery pressure and Allied air attacks. The myth says the war was decided by giant steel monsters fighting honorable duels across open fields. The reality was uglier. The German military was being systematically suffocated by Allied coordination. And the Americans understood this on a level Germany never matched. That's why American production philosophy looked so different. Germany chased perfection. America chased efficiency. Germany built fewer incredibly complicated machines. America built enormous numbers of reliable interconnected systems. And when industrial war reaches full scale, reliability usually beats perfection. A Sherman tank could be repaired faster, transported easier, produced quicker, maintained simpler, and most importantly, integrated into larger operational systems more effectively. The Sherman was never supposed to be a lone gladiator fighting tigers one-on-one. That misunderstanding came later. The Sherman was one component inside a gigantic combined arms machine involving artillery, logistics, infantry, radios, reconnaissance, engineers, fuel convoys, aircraft, and industrial support. And when all those systems worked together, German armor slowly became trapped inside a war it could no longer control. You can actually see the psychological collapse happen in German reports late in the war. Earlier campaigns were filled with confidence, aggression, momentum. But later reports increasingly describe exhaustion, fuel shortages, artillery fear, movement restrictions, constant air observation, communication breakdowns. And there's one detail that stands out repeatedly. German crews increasingly avoided movement during daylight hours. Think about how extraordinary that is. Panzer warfare was built around speed and aggression. Yet by 1945, elite armored crews were hiding from observation aircraft and artillery networks because movement itself had become dangerous. Entire tank columns waited for darkness before relocating. Roads became death traps. Intersections became artillery targets. Forests became suspected observation zones. The battlefield no longer belonged to whoever had the thickest armor. It belonged to whoever controlled information. And Germany was losing that battle everywhere. Then there's another part of this story most people never think about. Exhaustion. Not just physical exhaustion. Mental exhaustion. Imagine surviving months under constant artillery threat. Every distant engine sound makes you tense. Every open field feels exposed. Every radio transmission might mean incoming fire. You never know if somebody hidden miles away is already watching you through binoculars. Veteran soldiers described artillery anticipation as psychologically devastating because humans are wired to react to visible threats. A sniper. A tank. An aircraft. Something you can see. But artillery created helplessness. You couldn't fight it directly. You couldn't see most of the crews firing at you. You often couldn't even hear the guns themselves. And time-on-target barrages removed the final illusion of warning. There was no gradual escalation. No time to process danger. Just sudden overwhelming violence. One moment conversation. The next moment annihilation. That wears people down. Especially when it happens repeatedly. And by 1945, the German military was running out of experienced veterans capable of enduring it. Meanwhile, the American system kept expanding. More radios. More trucks. More ammunition. More artillery. More replacement crews. More fuel. The scale became overwhelming. At its peak, American logistical output reached levels Germany simply could not match anymore. A damaged artillery piece gets replaced. Destroyed ammunition gets replenished. Radio batteries arrive. Fresh trucks arrive. More shells arrive. Always more shells. That's another critical difference people often overlook. American artillery wasn't just accurate. It was abundant. The United States produced ammunition on a scale almost difficult to comprehend. And because the industrial pipeline remained functional, commanders could unleash firepower aggressively without constantly worrying about shortages the way German units increasingly had to. In many battles late in the war, American artillery commanders simply overwhelmed German positions through volume combined with precision. Not random bombardment. Controlled destruction. And once German fuel shortages worsened, the situation became hopeless for many armored units. A Tiger tank without fuel is just a bunker. A King Tiger without fuel is just a giant target. Again and again, German crews abandoned valuable tanks because they physically could not move them anymore. Some were destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. Others sat stranded while Allied artillery slowly closed in. The greatest armored force Europe had ever seen was being dismantled piece by logistics, communication networks, and industrial mathematics. Not by cinematic duels. Not by miracle weapons. By systems. That's the real lesson here. And honestly, it's a lesson that extends far beyond World War II. Throughout history, militaries often become obsessed with visible power. The biggest ship. The heaviest tank. The fastest jet. The most intimidating weapon. But wars are often decided by invisible structures operating underneath those machines. Communication. Coordination. Supply. Production. Adaptation. The Germans built incredible tanks. Nobody denies that. The Tiger remains legendary for a reason. The Panther was deadly. The King Tiger looked almost mythical. But they were still isolated machines trying to survive inside an enemy system specifically designed to destroy isolated machines. And eventually, that system overwhelmed them. One hidden observer. One radio transmission. One fire direction center. Then the sky opens. And somewhere inside a burning Panzer, another German crew realizes too late that armor alone was never going to save them. Because the Americans didn't beat the myth of German armor with a bigger myth. They beat it with coordination. They beat it with communication. They beat it with industrial-scale precision. And in the end, they beat it with math.